We like to think of pyramids as monuments to ego, as a final, desperate grasping of kings who wanted to outrun the clock. We look at them and we see stone, we see treasure, we see a story about pride. But look closer. Forget the golden masks and the tourist paths. What if the pyramids weren't built to commemorate the dead, but to measure the indifference of the universe? They are not shouting at history. They are listening to it. They are massive, calculated silences, built with a precision that defies the chaos of the sand around them. We aren't here to admire their height. We are here to stand in the shadow of the question they were built to ask. A question the desert has been waiting to answer for 5,000 years. Welcome back. We're going into the desert now. Not that one. Not the one you've already assembled in your head from travel photography and gift shop postcards. The pyramids in pastel at golden hour. The camel in the foreground looking bored. That version is fine. That version exists. But we're going somewhere underneath it tonight. And the way in requires you to let that other image soften at the edges for a while. The air is different here. I'm always unsure how to describe this part without sounding like I'm performing atmosphere. But I'll try. There's something in the air above Giza, very late at night, that sits against the back of your teeth. Not a taste, more like a pressure. The sky isn't black. It's the kind of deep bruised violet that you only see when you're standing somewhere genuinely old. Somewhere that was already old when oldness was invented. And the stars aren't twinkling because there's no moisture in the air to make them twinkle. They're just burning, fixed, factual. The sand isn't warm. I want to say that again because people always expect the desert to be warm at night, and it isn't. The surface releases heat after dark. Heat it's stored during the day, coming up through the stone from somewhere far below, from a depth where the rock has stopped being rock and is just pressure remembering what it used to be before it hardened. The warmth rises from underneath you. This is not metaphor. This is thermodynamics. Against that sky, 3 shapes. The mind refuses them at first, keeps insisting they're closer than they are, keeps scaling them down to something manageable, keeps wanting to call them mountains because at least that's a category it knows how to file. But mountains don't have edges like that. Mountains accumulate. These were arranged. Each edge is a decision someone made with a chisel. And the stone was carried here, dragged up ramps of packed rubble by men who were breathing and afraid and probably had calluses in places you've never thought about, while a stone weighing more than 15 adult human bodies tilted upright and began its journey toward a sky it would spend the next 4,000 years pointing at. Most people know the official version. Tombs. The pyramids are very large tombs for very important dead people. This is what the textbooks say. This is what the tour guide says in 7 languages every morning between 9 and noon. It's not wrong exactly, but it's the kind of right that starts to feel like a wall after a while, like someone put up an explanation in order to stop you from asking the question underneath it. Let me collect the thread here, actually. I've gotten ahead of myself. Before the tombs, before the theory, before any stone was placed, there was a world already fully formed and fully imagined. This is the mistake people make most reflexively, and it costs them everything. They imagine the people who built the pyramids as earlier, cruder, as something approaching human, but not quite arrived. And that's wrong. The human brain reached roughly its current configuration around 300,000 years ago. The pyramids are 4,500 years old. The builders were not proto-humans. They were not rougher drafts of us. They walked into the same grief. They lay awake wondering whether the things they believed were real. The animal inside them, the one that flinches at loss, identical. I keep coming back to this. I'm not sure why this detail matters so much to me, except that I think the whole story falls apart if you don't hold it. The Nile. You have to understand the Nile before any of the rest of this makes sense. The river flooded every year. The flood left behind black soil, impossibly rich, on a landscape that was otherwise limestone and dead air. The Egyptians called their land Kemet, the Black Land, named for that soil, named for the miracle of it. Past the reach of the flood was Deshret, the Red Land, the desert, and the line between them was not gradual. It was a clean, hard edge, the kind you can still see today if you look from the right altitude. One side green, one side nothing. Inside, life. Outside, the red land takes you. The pharaoh held that line, not symbolically. They didn't think in symbols the way we do. Everything was literal. Everything was structural. The divine and the physical were the same problem. The pharaoh's body was the contact point between the human world and whatever held the world together. His living body was the seal on that. Weaken the pharaoh, and the boundary weakened. Failed to translate his death properly. Failed to move him through the specific procedures that kept him present in the cosmos as a functioning force. And the Nile might not flood. The red land would advance. The crops fail. This wasn't superstition, or it was, but it was also engineering. The pyramids were machines, designed to do one thing: keep the dead king alive in the only way alive still meant something. Alive as a weight in the structure of things. Anyway, Khufu was afraid. I want to linger here a moment because I think we rush past this. Khufu, the man who commissioned the Great Pyramid, who set in motion a 20-year project that organized an entire civilization around a single geometric argument, woke up in the dark before dawn and was afraid. His body had started telling him things, the small messages that bodies send. He wasn't a symbol at 6 in the morning, alone with his thoughts. He was a person. His fear wasn't death in the general sense. He'd watched people die. He knew what dying looked like. His fear was more specific and more unbearable than that. It was the fear of being swallowed, of leaving no argument behind, of all that weight he'd carried. Every decision, every morning he woke before the sun and held an entire civilization in his chest, dissolving into sand without a mark, without anything to push back against the desert and say, I was here. I held the line. The Great Pyramid is what that fear built when it had enough resources. Whether it worked is a different question. The Plateau of Giza is limestone on the west bank of the Nile. West, because the sun goes west to die, and so the dead go west too. And so the whole tilt of Egyptian cosmology leans in that direction, toward where things end. The surveyors came first. Before the laborers, before the quarry gangs, before any of the people who would spend decades moving stone, the surveyors arrived with tools we can describe and cannot quite reconstruct. ropes knotted at measured intervals, sighting instruments that use stars as fixed points, because the stars don't drift the way the Earth does. The base of the Great Pyramid, each side roughly 230 meters. The deviation from a perfect square across the entire structure, 58 millimeters. 58. The alignment from true north is off by 3/60ths of a single degree. No GPS, no lasers, no computers. Ropes and stars and a quality of sustained human attention. This is the part I find genuinely difficult to describe. Not because the facts are unclear, but because that kind of attention is now nearly extinct as a practice. And I'm not sure I have the vocabulary for it anymore. What kind of mind lives inside that level of care about 58 millimeters? A mind that believed the alignment wasn't decorative. That 1 degree off and something real was lost. Something the dead king would reach for and find missing. Something with consequences. The precision came from fear or love, or the thing that lives between them, that the Egyptian language had a word for and ours has mostly forgotten. A word for knowing that the detail matters, because everything depends on the detail, not because someone will check your work. The ramps, and here I'll admit I'm rushing, because the ramp debate is one of those scholarly arguments that looks like it should be exciting and turns out to be mostly geometry. There are competing theories about how the blocks were moved to height. Straight ramps, spiral ramps, internal ramps, no consensus. Each model has a problem it can't fully solve. Straight ramp requires a ramp almost as large as the pyramid. Spiral ramp has corner problems. Internal ramp is elegant and almost impossible to verify. The blocks were moved. That much is certain. How specifically remains. It's like a key that almost fits every lock, but not quite. The workers weren't slaves. This was settled by archaeology some decades back, though it took a while to settle. Graffiti in the quarries, names, work gangs called things like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure, paid workers, housed workers, workers who were given medical care and buried with some dignity when they died on site. This doesn't make the labor less brutal. Blocks weighing 15 tons in heat that is not metaphorical. But they weren't slaves. They had names. They wrote the names down. I need to pause here. There's something I've been circling and haven't said directly. The pyramid was built to defeat oblivion. Everything, the precision, the scale, the alignment with the stars, the 20 years of organized human effort, everything is a refusal. The stone is a refusal. An argument made in the only material that might last long enough to matter. And standing at the base of it now, what you feel is, it works. It does something. 4,000 years later, it is still doing the thing it was built to do, which is to make you feel the presence of whoever made it as something real, something weighted, something that sat with its own fear in the dark before dawn and decided to answer it with geometry. Khufu's body has never been found. The burial chamber inside the Great Pyramid is empty. Was it robbed in antiquity, or was it always empty, always a shell, a location without a body because the body was the point and the body was elsewhere? This is still open. The sarcophagus is there, lid off. No mummy, no artifacts, no gold. Just a stone box in the stone room inside the stone mountain, and outside the desert doing what deserts do, which is wait. The internal passages are narrow. If you visit and go inside, You will crawl. You will be aware of your own body in the way you are, only when space becomes personal. The Grand Gallery, the tall, corbelled corridor that leads toward the king's chamber, opens suddenly from a low passage, and the ceiling is almost 9 meters above you, and the walls close in from both sides at an angle, and it's like the interior of a mind trying to describe something too large for it. I realize that's not a clean image. I kept it anyway. The stone is Tura limestone on the outside, or was. The casing stones that once made the surface smooth and white and reflective, visible from a distance that should have made them invisible, were mostly stripped after an earthquake in the 14th century to build Cairo. What we see now is the stepped core, the internal skeleton, the original surface bounced light. Ancient texts called the pyramid something close to the place that glitters. Standing at a distance across the Nile on a clear afternoon, the casing stones called the sun the way water does, flat and total, a brightness that had no business being that bright, that far away. Gone. The thing you're looking at isn't the thing they built. The thing they built is still there, inside, holding the shape. The outside is missing. I think about this more than is probably warranted. There's a moment, if you're standing at the base late enough, when the scale stops being impressive and starts being, I'm searching for the right word, not oppressive, not sublime in the borrowed romantic sense. Something more like, you become aware that the geometry doesn't care about you, that it was made for a different scale of time, that you are in the presence of a thing that was already 4,000 years old before your great-great-grandparents were born. The stone has outlasted the civilization that made it, outlasted the religion that explained it, outlasted the language it was built to speak. It is now illegible in the specific sense. We can read the texts, we know the names, we have the measurements, but the interior logic, what it actually felt like to believe that this would work, that the line between life and death could be held by a building, that is gone, and we are working around its absence, describing the shape of the gap. The wind at this hour is nothing. Stars. Khufu ordered this. A human person, afraid, with a body that was already starting to fail him in the small ways, ordered the most precise large structure ever built by human hands, and then died, and the structure has been here since, and he has been gone since, and the structure remembers him in the way that only stone remembers anything, without understanding, without sentiment, with just the fact of the shape. He wanted to argue with oblivion. The shape is the argument. We're going in now. You are standing at the edge of the plateau. The workers arrive before the sun does. In that long blue hour before first light, when the desert is still cold and the stars haven't decided to leave yet, they come in groups, not chains, not what the myth insists on, the whips, the broken men, the force of it, something else. Organized teams with names, with leaders, with shifts that rotated and bread that was provided twice a day, and doctors in the nearby settlement, and actual housing. They called themselves Zhao. The word carries something that translation scrapes the meaning off of, something like the king's companions, or the trusted ones, or, and this is the register that the language holds, and I'm not sure any English word reaches. Something like the ones who understood what the work required and came anyway. They were not enslaved. They were participating. And I want to stay with that distinction for a moment because I think it's the hinge that the whole story swings on. Participation means consent. Consent means meaning. Meaning means the stone holds something inside it that isn't just Khufu's fear. It holds the will of everyone who believed the work was real, who came in the cold dark before sunrise because the world required it, and they were the ones who showed up. The Great Pyramid is not one man's monument. It belongs to the people who hauled it into place. Here is the thing that architects knew and didn't say plainly. The pyramid was failing before it was finished. Not in any structural sense. The geometry held, the alignment held, the stone held. The failure was in the premise. The premise being that a physical object, however large, however precisely built, however aligned to the stars, with a care that still confounds us, that such an object could fix a living consciousness in place after the body stopped, could hold the specific person, could prevent the dissolving. But stone doesn't hold the way a mind holds. Stone doesn't hold the specific texture of a person, the way Khufu moved through a room, the particular weight of what he meant when he stood over a map and pointed to a place and said, "Here, we build here." That fullness went into the air at the moment of his death and dispersed. The pyramid was completed, the tallest structure on Earth, and it would stay that way for 4,000 years. And Khufu was still dead. The arrangement of consciousness that had been him was simply gone. I want to pause on the moment of completion. Somewhere in the space between what was recorded and what was felt, in that gap, there is an image that has to have existed. The final casing stone being placed. The pyramid was once encased entirely in polished white limestone. Blinding. Greek travelers who saw it centuries later couldn't look at it straight on in direct sunlight, described it throwing light back at you the way still water does, flat and total and almost aggressive. So there was a moment. The foreman, whose name is in no inscription, placed the last stone, smoothed the joint, stepped back, looked at the white mountain against the sky, the thing they had made, and felt something that moved through his chest and behind his eyes and had no clean name. Not pride exactly. Something older than pride. Something without edges. Then he stepped down off the ramp. The ramp was dismantled. The pyramid stood there. The desert moved around it. The Nile flooded and pulled back and flooded it again. The stars continued their rotation, slow and indifferent, and very precise. The pyramid didn't move. If you are the kind of person who carries something you cannot put down, a question about whether what you spend yourself on is actually building anything, whether the energy goes somewhere or just disperses, then what comes next will not comfort you. I'm not going to pretend it will. It will do something different. It will sit next to you in the dark and tell you what is true. Stay. The plan for the body. 70 days. Mummification took 70 days because 70 days was the period of Sobdet, Sirius, the bright star, the exact window during which it vanished below the horizon, before rising again in the east just before dawn at the moment of the annual flood. The star died. 70 days. The star was reborn. The pharaoh, during those same 70 days, would exist in the suspended state, not fully dead, not yet translated, moving through whatever passage existed between what he had been and what the ritual was attempting to make him become. The embalmers were priests of Anubis, the jackal, the god whose entire jurisdiction was the boundary between life and death, which, if you've been paying attention, was also the pharaoh's jurisdiction in life. Maintaining the seal, they worked near the river, in a tent on the west bank, and they worked in silence. And what they did over 70 days was simultaneously medical and metaphysical. And I find I can't fully separate those two things in my head when I think about it, which might mean the Egyptians were right about something. The brain was removed first, through the nostril with a long, hooked instrument. This sounds brutal, and it was, and also, the brain was not considered important, not the seat of anything, a cooling organ, a temperature regulator, disposable. The heart was everything. The heart stayed. The heart was the seat of consciousness, the seat of memory, the place where the individual actually lived. The Egyptian word was ib. The IB was what you brought with you. The IB was what you were asked to account for. After death, in the Hall of Two Truths, the great courtroom of the underworld, which I realize sounds like a metaphor, but was understood as a literal place with a literal procedure. The heart of the dead was placed on one side of a scale. On the other side, a feather, the feather of Ma'at, truth, balance, rightness. If the heart was heavier than the feather, if the accumulated weight of what you had done and failed to do and taken and withheld was greater than the lightness of a life lived in truth, the heart was consumed by Amit, part lion, part hippopotamus, part crocodile, the beast that waited by the scale, patient in the way that only things without needs can be patient. If Amit took your heart, you ceased to exist entirely. No punishment, no suffering, no underworld of torment, just nothing. The second death, the one that couldn't be reversed. This is what the pyramid was built to argue against. The first death was mechanical, inevitable, not the problem. The second death was the problem, the dissolution. The pyramid was the opening line of the argument. I mattered enough that an entire civilization arranged stone around my name. The Book of the Dead, all those spells and instructions placed in the tomb, was the second line. I knew the words, I knew the path, I knew the correct names for the gates. And then, the weighing of the heart was the third line, and the third line was the one no pyramid could help with, the one no spell could shortcut, the one that came down to the actual quality of the life that had actually been lived. Khufu could align his pyramid to within 3/60ths of a degree from true north. He could fill the burial chamber with gold and seal jars and inscribed walls dense with every known protective spell, and then his heart would go on the scale, and the feather would go on the other side. And all that stone, all those years, all those men in the cold dark before sunrise would not move the scale, not by a millimeter. The scale didn't know about the pyramid. The scale only knew the heart. Anyway, the execution was flawless. It always is, in the stories that end this way. Every ceremony performed correctly, every rite spoken, every offering placed. The stone was sealed, the passages were blocked, the chambers were closed, and eventually the tomb was robbed. Not immediately, not while the state still had power and the guards were posted and the memory of Khufu was fresh enough to be feared. But later, in the first intermediate period, when the old kingdom's centralized power collapsed and the regional governors consolidated independent authority, and the idea of a unified Egypt briefly dissolved back into the competing city-states it had once been assembled from. In that period, men with torches and iron tools went into the tombs, took the gold, stripped the linen, disturbed the canopic jars, dismantled the very structures that had required an entire civilization to build and were supposed to guarantee safe passage through eternity. Dismantled them because they were hungry and had understood something the dead king had not, that the dead don't need it. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber is empty, has been empty for as long as we have records of anyone going in to look. The lid is off. The stone box sits in the stone room in the stone mountain, and the desert waits outside the way deserts wait, without urgency, without judgment, without any particular feeling about the result. I keep thinking about the foreman, the one with no name who placed the last stone and felt the thing that moved through his chest with no clean name. I don't know why I keep thinking about him specifically. He finished the work. He did what was asked. He smoothed the joint and stepped back and looked at what they'd made and felt it. The full weight of having built something that large, something that would outlast everything he knew. And then he climbed down and went home and ate bread and slept and eventually died. And the pyramid was still there. The pyramid is still there. This is what permanence looks like when it actually works. The thing remains, and the people who made it are gone, and the reason it was built has dissolved, and the language it was built to speak is a language we can read but cannot hear as it was meant to be heard. What remains is only the shape, the geometry, the fact of the edges. And still, this is the part that keeps me up, the part I can't resolve. Still, you feel something standing at the base of it. Still, there is the weight of the thing. Still, the stone does the one thing stone can do, which is to say, here. Something was here. Something believed enough in its own mattering to spend 20 years and an entire civilization's organized effort building this specific argument against the dark. The argument is incomplete. The argument has always been incomplete. It stands there anyway. Stars, sand, 3 shapes against the sky, and the mind keeps failing to scale them correctly, and the desert waits, and somewhere underneath you the heat rises from the stone, and you are standing where the work happened, where the ramp was, where the foreman stood. The pyramid doesn't know you're there. You're there. The plan failed. The execution was perfect, and the plan failed anyway. And I'm not sure there's a more honest sentence in this whole story than that one. The Great Pyramid is still there. Still, at 4,500 years old, structurally more intact than buildings erected last century. And it is empty. The pharaoh whose name it carries is not in it. Whether Amit took him, or the field of reeds received him, or he simply dissolved into the geology of the valley the way everything eventually does. We don't know. We will not know. The specific arrangement of consciousness and fear and ambition that was Khufu is gone. The stone remains. The man doesn't. The hollow victory is made of limestone. Try to imagine standing inside the king's chamber. Actually try, because photographs lie about it in a specific way. They compress the darkness into something with visible edges, something the eye can organize. The reality is different. You descend through a low passage that makes you hunch, makes you smaller than you are, and the stone around you is cold in a way that isn't about temperature exactly. It's cold the way deep earth is cold. Cold that has its own relationship with time, its own climate, that has never been warm and is not merely the absence of warmth, but the presence of something else, something with a name we haven't agreed on yet. Then the passage opens. Red granite walls, quarried at Aswan, 800 kilometers south, floated down the Nile during flood season on boats, hauled up the plateau on sledges, fitted into place with joints of a fraction of a millimeter. The ceiling, 9 granite slabs, each between 40 and 60 tons. The room itself, 17 meters long, 5 wide, 5.5 high, and slightly west of center, the direction the dead go. The sarcophagus, 1 block of red Aswan granite, cut from a single piece, too large to have come through the passage, which means it was placed before the room was finished, before the final courses of stone were laid above it, before the capstone went on. The sarcophagus was here before the pyramid enclosed it. It was the fixed coordinate around which the geometry was organized. The origin point. It is empty. Lid taken by robbers who came in the dark. Body gone. Gold gone. Linen gone. Nothing in the chamber now but the cold air and the red walls and the silence of a space built specifically for something that is no longer in it. This is the hollow victory. The pyramid succeeded. It is still here. It outlasted every structure that civilization built. It outlasted the civilization. It will likely outlast ours. 4,500 years from now, assuming the warming seas don't bury it or flood it, it will still be here, still off from true north by 3/60ths of a degree, still weighing 6 million tons against the plateau, still the most famous building on Earth. And at its center will be an empty box in a cold room where nothing lives. Khufu wanted permanence. He got it. Khufu wanted to survive. He didn't. I want to be careful here because it's easy to read this as a story about failure. And it isn't. Or it isn't only that. What it is, what I keep coming back to, what I find I can't file neatly away, is a story about the precise shape of what permanence actually is. The container survives, the content dissolves, the vessel outlasts the water, the name outlasts the person, and in the distance between the thing built and the thing it was meant to preserve, in that gap, that hollow, the empty chamber where the sarcophagus sits without its lid, there is something true about why we build anything. Something that resists being called either success or failure, because it is both at once, and those categories are too small for it. Let me collect the thread here. We build things because we cannot hold the moment in our bodies, because being alive is too large and too brief and too overwhelming to carry without something solid to put it into. And the things we build outlast us, which is the victory, and the things we build outlast us, which is the loss. And those two facts are the same fact. The pyramid is honest about this. That's what I keep coming back to. The empty chamber at the heart of the Great Pyramid is the most honest room ever built. It says, I tried, with everything I had and everything the civilization behind me had, with stone and mathematics and the alignment of the stars and 20 years of organized human will. And the thing I was trying to hold still escaped. The stone that tells you This is still warm in the morning light. The sarcophagus that holds nothing is still, in its emptiness, the most beautiful container in the world. I realize that's a strange thing to say. I'm not sure I can fully justify it, but I kept it. Anyway, the tempo slows. The desert slows. Somewhere out past the edge of the city's electric vigil, the red land continues. Patient, indifferent, ancient in a way that makes 4,500 years feel like an afternoon, like a moment that passed before you registered it was happening. The stars complete another small portion of their rotation. The violet above the plateau deepens towards something that isn't quite black. There is a question living inside the empty chamber. It is not about architecture or engineering or how you move 6 million tons of limestone without a wheel. It is smaller than all of that. It is bigger. It is the question Khufu asked, I imagine, in the hours before the servants arrived to dress him, the hours when the pharaoh was not the pharaoh, but just a person whose body ached, a person whose mind would not quiet, a person who had been given more and built more than anyone before him, and who was still in the dark, not enough, not safe, not certain that any of it meant what he needed it to mean. The question is, what is enough? Not enough stone? Not enough gold? Not enough precision? What is enough as a life? What does it look like? What does it actually feel like from the inside? To have lived in a way that the heart, when it is placed on the scale, is not heavy with what you hoarded and destroyed and pretended not to see. What is the version of a life that sits in the weighing, light as a feather? Light the way truth is light. Light the way a thing feels when it has been honestly itself for the full length of its existence and has nothing left to argue. Khufu built a pyramid instead of answering it. Most of us do something like this on a smaller scale. We build the container instead of attending to the content. We arrange the stone instead of examining what the stone is meant to protect. We align ourselves with precision to the external markers, career, reputation, the structure visible from a distance, and the chamber at the center is cold, is empty, is waiting. The desert doesn't judge this. The pyramid doesn't. The feather doesn't. But the scale is honest. The scale is always honest. It doesn't know about the pyramid. It doesn't care what the pyramid weighs. It only knows the weight of what was kept inside it, what was lived, what was real. This question will not leave you tonight. It isn't meant to. It will settle into the space between waking and sleeping, where the mind is too tired to deflect and too alive to stop. And it will wait there, the way the desert waits, the way the stone waits, the way the empty sarcophagus waits in the cold room for something that is not coming back. In its waiting, it is, somehow, beautiful. The stars burn. The pyramid doesn't move. You will go home and sleep and wake, and the question will still be there. Good. Now, in the dark, something else. Not the measurements, not the logistics, not the official history with its laminated confidence. Something underneath all of that. Something the archaeologists note and then step past because their discipline has no folder for it. Something the tourists photograph and the tour guides recite, and nobody pauses on. A detail so small and so enormous, it tends to slide right off the surface of your attention, the way water slides off-polished stone. There is graffiti inside the pyramids, not robbers, not tourists, not the modern kind with spray cans and grievances. The graffiti of the builders in the relieving chambers above the king's chamber. Spaces built into the structure to distribute the weight overhead. Spaces sealed into the pyramid and never meant to be entered again. Spaces that stayed sealed for 4,000 years until 1837. In those hidden chambers, written on raw stone in red ochre, are the names of the work gangs. Written in a cartouche, the oval frame, the frame Egyptians used specifically to enclose royal names, the frame designed to protect a name from dissolution, the frame that said, "This name is held, this name matters." In that frame, in the handwriting of a foreman who has been dead for 4,500 years, are the words, "The Friends of Khufu." The gang who built that section called themselves, in their own hand, in a space nobody was supposed to ever see again, the friends of the man they were building for. I find this. I've tried several times to describe what this does, and I keep abandoning the sentences halfway through, which I think means I'm trying to be too precise about something that resists precision. It shifts something, in the chest specifically, the place where the scale would go. These were not the commemorated names, not the faces on the monument, not the priests in the inscriptions, not the people history chose to record. They were the hands, the anonymous labor, the ones whose backs carried the actual weight. And they went into the spaces that would be sealed, that no eye would see again. They went there and they wrote their collective name, not for the pharaoh, not for the record, for the stone, for whoever eventually came. For you, it turns out, 4,500 years later, standing in a hidden chamber, reading something written in the absolute conviction it would never be read. We were here. We carried this. We were not slaves. We were friends. The whisper grows here. The desert grows. The stars move their fraction of a degree, and the pyramid does not move. And the names in the hidden chamber do not move. And the thing they were trying to say, we existed, we worked, we cared about the work, we were here. That thing moves. That thing moved while you weren't watching and has already arrived somewhere important. Let me collect the thread. The Great Pyramid is the only one of the original 7 wonders still standing. The Colossus of Rhodes, gone. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, possibly never existed at all, which is its own kind of heartbreak. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, rubble. The Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, a foundation. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, sediment at the bottom of the harbor. The statue of Zeus at Olympia. Description and myth, nothing more. The pyramid is here. Here in a way that very few things made by human hands are here, present in the world, not just physically, but temporally. Not just located in space, but located in something like an expanded present that holds the past inside it. Standing at the base, you are not looking at a ruin. You are looking at a working object. Its original function, protecting a specific consciousness through the afterlife, failed. But the secondary function, the one nobody planned for, works with a precision the primary function never achieved. The secondary function is this. It makes you feel the weight of time, not as an abstraction. Physically, the cold of the stone, the joints between the blocks so tight that in many places A sheet of paper won't pass between them. The geometry still aligned, still precise, still off from true north by 3/60ths of a degree. The weight of time descends, settles, and here is the thing. It isn't depressing, it's grounding. The specific anxieties of a specific life become briefly, mercifully small, and the thing that was always large and always true and always present underneath them, the basic fact of being alive in a world that has been building and forgetting and building again for longer than comprehension can reach, that thing comes forward, breathes. The workers ate bread and beer and dried fish. The bread was coarse, emmer wheat grown in the Black Land, ground by women in the settlement to the east of the Plateau. A settlement we've now excavated enough to know its dimensions, its bakeries, its breweries, its medical facilities, its sleeping quarters, its administrative buildings. 12,000 workers at peak construction. 12,000 people who woke before dawn and worked until the light failed and ate their rations and slept in organized rows, who had names and injuries and complaints and families, who wrote their gang name in red ochre in a sealed chamber. The irreducibility of 12,000 individual human lives is now compressed into the statistic of 12,000 and the measurement of 58 millimeters. That compression is the loss. The pyramid is the consolation for the loss. The consolation isn't enough. Nothing is ever enough. The pyramid stands anyway. The Nile, then. I want to go to the Nile because the Nile is where all of this started, and something important still lives there if you know where to look. In the ancient world, the flooding was not announced by satellite or gauges upstream. It was announced by the heliacal rising of Sirius, by the star's reappearance in the eastern sky just before dawn after its 70-day absence. The star appeared. Weeks later, the flood arrived. And this was not incidental. The connection was cosmological. The star and the flood were the same event in two different registers, one in the sky, one on the earth. And the alignment between them was the fundamental rhythm of the universe as Egypt understood it. Ma'at, usually translated as truth or justice or balance or rightness, all correct, all incomplete. What Ma'at actually names is the state in which everything is doing what it is supposed to do. Nothing pretending to be something else. The feather and the heart in balance, because the life was lived in alignment with what it actually was. Ma'at is not a moral code. It's a description of harmony, a description of the world when it is being honest about itself. The pyramid was an attempt to purchase Ma'at with architecture, to buy the alignment with stone and gold and 20 years of organized human will. The universe, characteristically, would not be bought. But the workers who wrote their name in the hidden chamber, they were doing something close to Ma'at, acknowledging the truth of their presence, saying, in red ochre on raw stone in a space they knew would be sealed, this is what actually happened here. Not the official version, not the version the monument tells, the version of the hands that built it. That act, small, private, honest, written for nobody, was lighter than a feather, and it has lasted longer than most things that tried very hard to last. Anyway, the stone is cold, the chamber is sealed. The night outside is the same night that covered the workers as they slept in rows on the eastern edge of the plateau, the same night that covered Khufu lying awake, wondering whether the monument was large enough to hold the fear, the same night that covered the embalmers in their tent by the river, and the surveyors before the first stone was placed, and the robbers who came in the dark, and the Greek travelers who described the blinding white casing, and the medieval Arab builders who stripped those casing stones for the mosques of Cairo, and every person who has stood at the base of the structure and felt the weight of time come down and settle in the chest. The same night, the same sky, the same stars, the pyramid unmoved in the middle of all of it, pointing north with its 3/60ths of a degree error, its empty chamber at the center, its hidden graffiti in the sealed spaces above, where the names wait in the dark in red ochre, patient and complete, waiting for nothing because they have already done what they came to do. 6 million tons of compressed time balanced on the limestone plateau of Giza, which is balanced on the surface of the earth, which is balanced in the darkness of space, which is balanced on nothing. The same nothing Khufu was afraid of. The workers were not afraid of it. They had written their name in the dark. They knew they had been there. We are moving through something different now, not information, not analysis. The attention required here is the attention of presence, the kind that notices what is happening in the body while the words move through it. The chest, the place just below the sternum, the throat. These are not metaphors. These are the places where the scale would register if you were being honest, if the feather were placed against what you are carrying right now. Notice what is there. Notice the weight of it. Notice whether it is what it appears to be. The second pyramid sits slightly to the southwest on the plateau. Khafra's pyramid. It appears taller than the Great Pyramid because it was built on slightly higher ground and because it still has casing stones at the apex, polished white limestone, the original surface, the thing that made all three of them blinding and impossible to look at straight on in the afternoon sun. Standing at the base, the scale is slightly smaller than the Great Pyramid, the proportions a little different. But at the top, where the white casing survives, something happens that the Great Pyramid can no longer do. It shows you what they looked like. The original idea, not stepped, not a building that shows its courses the way a tree shows its rings, but a smooth, unbroken surface, so consistent and continuous that the structure stops being an engineering fact and becomes a geometric ideal, a proof, the idea of permanence rather than the attempt at it. Khafra looked at what his father built and understood something his father hadn't been able to say clearly. The pyramid must become pure form. Any visible seam, any texture, any evidence of the process by which it was assembled, any of that would remind you it was built by human hands and could, in principle, be taken apart by human hands. The smooth surface was the lie that told the truth. This is not a building. This is a mountain. Mountains are not made. Mountains simply are. Khufu's pyramid, stripped of its casing, says, "We built this." Khafra's pyramid, at least at the apex, says, "This has always been here." The difference between those two statements is the difference between a monument and a myth. The Sphinx watches all of this from its position east of the second pyramid, carved from the same limestone shelf that gave raw material to the pyramid complexes. Its human face turned toward the rising sun, its gaze level and long and directed at something beyond the physical field of vision, somewhere past the horizon in the direction of where the day begins. It does not look at the pyramids. It does not look at the Nile. It looks east, at what comes first, the light, the star, the beginning, and in the geological record of its surface, in the deep vertical erosion channels on the body that some researchers argue were cut by rainfall, not wind, by the kind of sustained rainfall that last fell on the Giza Plateau, somewhere between 9,000 and 12,000 years ago. There is the possibility, still disputed, still genuinely unsettled, that the Sphinx is older than the pyramids, older than the Old Kingdom, older than the historical record of Egypt as we understand it, that it was here before Khafra claimed it for his funerary complex, that it is staring east toward a sunrise that preceded everything we know about this culture and may carry inside its limestone body the memory of a civilization whose name we have not recovered. The Sphinx says nothing about this. The Sphinx looks east. The Sphinx had been looking east for a very long time. The Sphinx is the most patient thing on earth. Let me collect the thread here, because what comes next has a cost, and I want you ready for it. Every piece of information in this story carries a cost. The cost is always physical before it is psychological. Here is the information. The granite beams above the king's chamber weigh, collectively, more than 400 tons. Each beam spans the full width of the chamber, approximately 5 meters. Quarried at Aswan, 800 kilometers south, transported by Nile barge during flood season, hauled up the plateau on sledge and ramp, fitted into place with millimeter tolerance. And above those beams, 5 sets of relieving chambers, a saddle-shaped limestone roof, and then the millions of tons of the pyramid itself pressing down. The entire system distributes that weight so precisely, so elegantly, that the king's chamber has remained intact and uncrushed for 4,500 years, through earthquakes, through the stripping of the casing stones, through every robber and archaeologist and grieving person and curious person who came and stood inside it. Here's the cost. The engineers who designed this could not test it. No computer model, no scaled prototype. They designed it mathematically, from first principles, from their understanding of how stone behaves under compression, from their knowledge of the exact angle at which limestone fails and the angle at which it holds. Then they built it, then they sealed it, and they could never open it again to verify the thing was working. The design had to be right on the first attempt. I find I keep starting a sentence here and abandoning it because I'm not sure what I want to say is actually sayable. The confidence required, to trust your mathematics so completely that you seal the evidence of your trust inside the very structure that depends on it. This is not arrogance. Arrogance doesn't look like this. This is what it looks like when a mind has thought a problem all the way through and arrived at something it believes and cannot prove, and does it anyway. Stand in the king's chamber. Look up. 400 tons of granite above your head, and above that the millions of tons of the pyramid itself. You cannot feel the force directly. The engineering that redirects it into the walls and away from you has been working perfectly for 4,500 years. But you feel it anyway, as a density in the air, a gravitational significance, as if the stone knows you are there and is making space for you in its arrangement of forces. The chamber is not crushing you, it is holding you, but it is making very clear which one it is and which one you are. And so, what is load-bearing in your life and what is casing and what is rubble fill between the two? How much of what you have constructed, in habit, in reputation, in relationship, in the daily structure of how you move through the world, how much of it is actually holding weight, and how much of it is the smooth surface designed to make you look like a mountain? And when the casing is stripped, when the things that were meant to make you look permanent are taken away by time or loss, or the specific honesty of a specific night like this one, what does the structure underneath look like? Are the joints tight? Will the chamber hold? These are not rhetorical questions. They have been building in the substructure of this story since the first stone was placed. They do not resolve here. They are not supposed to resolve here. The not resolving is the point. The not resolving is what makes the feather relevant. And the feather is very light, and it is waiting. Anyway, the third pyramid. Menkaur's pyramid is the smallest of the three, and it is the most human. Not because of its size, not because its construction is less precise. It is the most human because it was not finished. Menkaura died before the pyramid was complete. The completion was hurried. The casing stones at the base were not the polished white Tura limestone that covered the others. They were granite, red Aswan granite, the funeral stone, the stone of the inner chamber, placed in haste and not finished to the same standard, rough in places, a mark of incompletion that has lasted 4,500 years as the most permanent record of a deadline that was missed because the person who set it died before it arrived. The pyramid of Menkaur is what happens when a person begins to understand, or when circumstance forces the understanding on them, that the argument against dissolution does not require maximum scale. It requires honesty. It requires the particular courage of building something true to your actual size, your actual capacity, your actual life, rather than building something designed to compensate for the fear that your actual life is insufficient. Menkaur died. The pyramid was not finished. The workers hurried the casing in granite and went home. The pyramid stood. The pyramid stands. The incompletion is part of it now. The incompletion is the most truthful thing about it. The rough granite at the base where the smooth limestone should be, that is the record of a human life hitting its actual limit. No compensation, no correction after the fact. Just the pyramid as it was when the work stopped, which is to say, the pyramid as it is, 4,500 years of standing there, unfinished, in full view of the two enormous structures to its north, and the incompletion has not diminished it. The incompletion has held. The fourth dynasty ended. The fifth dynasty pharaohs built their pyramids smaller, less precise in the stonework, more elaborate inside, walls covered for the first time in writing, in the spells and hymns and instructions that would become the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in the world, first carved into the chambers of Unas, last pharaoh of the fifth dynasty, around 2375 BCE. The pyramid texts are the written form of what the Great Pyramid expressed in stone. The argument that death is a passage, that the consciousness which inhabited a specific life does not simply stop, but translates, moves, becomes something the living cannot see but can address, can reach with the right words. The earliest religious literature of humanity is a letter to the dead. It is an attempt to stay in contact across the boundary that the pyramid was built to hold open. The texts are beautiful, strange. They describe a journey through a landscape that is both geographical and psychological, through gates guarded by beings who can be appeased with correct words, through a darkness that is not empty but populated by everything that was ever feared, through encounters with gods whose names are the names of the forces that run the world, the sun, the flood, the scales. And if the journey is successful, if the words are right and the heart is light and the path is navigated correctly, the journey arrives at the field of reeds, which is not a heavenly realm of pure spirit, which is not an escape from the world, which is Egypt, the Black Land, the Nile in flood, the crops, the bread and beer, the warm morning light on limestone, the smell of the desert releasing its stored heat in the evening. The afterlife the ancient Egyptians aspired to was more of the world working correctly, the world in Mahat, the world where the flood arrived at the right depth and the star rose at the right moment, and the heart was light because the life had been lived in harmony with what it actually was. This is the most generous reading of the pyramid, not as a monument to power, not as an argument against fear, as a love letter to the world, as a way of saying, this specific, material, sensory, difficult, beautiful, temporary world is so good that I want more of it, even after, especially after. I want the flood and the heat and the bread. I want the sound of the river and the weight of the morning. I want to stand at the exact edge of the Black Land and the Red Land and feel where the boundary is. I want to be here. I want to keep being here. The pyramid is not a denial of death. The pyramid is an expression of attachment to life, a love so large it needed 6 million tons of stone to say it. The sand outside the plateau is moving, very slowly, barely visible to any individual observer, but accumulating over centuries into a repositioning so vast that the relationship between the pyramids and the surrounding landscape has shifted multiple times since construction. In the earliest period of the Old Kingdom, the plateau was more accessible from the river. The valley temples sat at the edge of the flood plain, connected to the Nile during inundation season, priests and offerings arriving by boat directly to the base of the processional causeway. Now the valley temple of Khafra sits inland, hemmed in by the expanded modern city, surrounded by a civilization that was not planning for the long term. The city got closer. The desert got closer too, from the west, from the direction of the dead. The pyramids stand between them. The pyramids have always stood between them. This is not symbolic, it is literal. The pyramids were built on the edge of the habitable world, the edge of the Nile's reach, the precise line between the Black Land and the Red Land, between what can be maintained and what is lost to heat and time and the patient indifference of the sand. They were built on the edge because the edge was the right place. The dead live on the edge. The sun dies on the edge. The star disappears below the edge and reappears 70 days later. The edge is where the transformation happens. The edge is where the thing that was one thing becomes another thing. The pyramid was placed there to hold open the door between what is and what comes next, between what we are and what we might be if the engineering is sound and the heart is light and the night is long enough to ask the question honestly. Inside the Grand Gallery, the extraordinary ascending corridor that leads to the king's chamber, 47 meters long and 8.5 meters high, its walls corbelled inward in 7 successive steps into a shape that is half vault, half canyon, a shape with no architectural precedent and no clear successor. Inside the Grand Gallery, your footsteps sound differently than they sound anywhere else. The stone absorbs certain frequencies and reflects others. What you hear in that space is a version of your own movement that has been processed by the pyramid, taken in, changed by its passage through the geometry, returned to you as something slightly unfamiliar, slightly transformed. The architecture does something measurable to sound. It takes the footstep and gives it back as something larger than a footstep, something that has traveled through the stone and returned with information it didn't leave with. This is possibly what all architecture aspires to take the ordinary human presence and return it enlarged, resonant, meaningful beyond its own moment. The house that makes you feel held, the library that makes you feel accompanied by every thought ever thought inside it. The Grand Gallery takes your footstep and gives it back as a sound that has passed through 4,500 years of stone. I find I keep stopping here, standing in this part of the story, the way you stand in a room where something important happened, not quite ready to leave. The robbers came in the dark. They were not villains. They were not heroes. They were the consequence of a system collapsing. The Old Kingdom, the period of the great pyramid builders of Khufu and Khafre and Menkaure, lasted roughly from 2686 to 2181 BCE. 500 years of a centralized theocratic state organized around the absolute authority of the pharaoh, the absolute hierarchy of the divine order. Then the drought came. The Nile failed. The floods were insufficient for several consecutive years. We know this from the climate record, from the pollen record, from the sediment layers of the river itself. The crops failed. People starved. The local governors, who had always been theoretically subordinate to the pharaoh, discovered that in practice, when the pharaoh's divine mandate failed to prevent famine, the pharaoh's authority meant nothing. The Old Kingdom collapsed. The country fragmented. The center did not hold. The people who robbed the pyramids were not monsters. They were people who had watched children die of hunger in a landscape that contained the most heavily gold-stocked tomb complexes in the ancient world. They were people for whom the theological argument, the gold is the dead pharaohs, the gold sustains the divine order, without the gold the cosmos fails, had been answered definitively by the cosmos itself, which had already failed, which had already withheld the flood, which had already let the crops die in the ground. If the divine order was maintained by the pharaoh's continued existence in the afterlife, and that required all this gold, and the divine order had failed anyway, then the gold was not doing what it was supposed to do, and there were children starving. and the gold was in a stone box. The robbers were parents. Possibly. And I keep returning to this. I'm not sure why it matters so much to me, but it does. Possibly the children or grandchildren of people who had written their name in red ochre in the hidden chamber. People who had called themselves the Friends of Khufu. The system that gave the pyramid its meaning had failed. In that failure, the pyramid became simply a very large stone building full of gold, and the dead pharaoh inside became simply a preserved body. And the second death the structure was designed to prevent became simply the technical dissolution of an embalmed corpse, and the gold was taken, and the lids were broken, and the robbers went home, and the pyramid stood empty in the desert, and said nothing, or said everything, depending on the ear. This is the part of the story that I find hardest to hold steady. Not because it's tragic, though it is, but because it refuses to organize itself into a lesson. The pyramid was built to prevent exactly this: the precision, the alignment, the 20 years of organized human will, all of it aimed at a future in which the pharaoh remained intact and attended to and present in the cosmos as a functioning force. And the thing that undid all of it was not imprecision, not insufficient ambition, not a failure of engineering or faith or ritual. It was a drought, a change in the climate, a series of Nile floods that came in at insufficient depth for reasons that had nothing to do with the pharaoh or his monument or the correctness of the ceremonies performed at his death. The cosmos failed first, the pyramid failed second, the robbers were third. And the thing I can't quite resolve, the thing I keep circling in the dark, the thread I keep picking up and putting down, is that the pyramid still stands. After all of that, after the drought and the collapse and the fragmentation and the robbers and the stripping of the casing stones by medieval builders and the tourists and the archaeologists and the cameras, the empty chamber at its center is still cold. The joints are still tight. The geometry is still aligned to within 3/60ths of a degree from true north. The thing that was supposed to survive, the consciousness, the memory, the specific person, is gone. The container is here, and the container is still doing something. Still processing the footstep in the grand gallery and returning it altered, still making you feel the weight of time in the place below the sternum, still holding the names of the workers in the sealed chambers above the king's chamber, the red ochre letters in the dark, the cartouche that says, Friends of Khufu, still pointing east in the orientation of its causeway, toward the place where the star rises and the flood arrives and the day begins again. The pyramid is not a success. The pyramid is not a failure. The pyramid is what remains when you have tried everything you know how to try, with everything you have as precisely as you can, and the thing you were trying to protect still escaped. And what remains is the trying itself, visible, enormous, aligned to the stars with a 3/60th of a degree error that is so small it took modern instruments to measure it, and so human it makes the throat tighten. The trying is the monument. The trying has lasted. The perspective shifts here. You have been watching for most of this, a kind of witness, hanging back at a slight remove from the surveyors and the quarrymen and the pharaoh and the grave robbers and the archaeologists who arrive centuries later with their brushes and their notebooks and their quiet, persistent need to understand. You have been watching all of them. Now the vantage point changes. Now it is yours. You know what it is to build around a fear, not abstractly, actually. You know what it is to arrange the material of your life toward the thing you most cannot stand to look at directly, the dissolving, the forgetting, the being nothing. The second death, which is not physical death, but the death of having mattered, the death of significance, the erasure of presence from the world's memory in a way that feels. In the specific hours this kind of story was built for, the horizontal hours, the quiet after the noise has settled, and what's left is the actual weight of things. Worse than the first one. Everyone knows this. In those hours, everyone knows this. The pyramid did not prevent Khufu's second death. Whatever that means, whatever that is, the pyramid is still here. It will outlast you and everyone you love, and everyone they love, and every structure they raise, and every story they carry. And in the hidden chamber above the king's chamber, the relieving space, the space that was sealed before the building was finished, the space built for silence and load-bearing and nothing else. In the red ochre handwriting of a foreman whose name does not appear in any official record, whose name is not carved in the official spaces, there is a kind of second life that Khufu's monument did not achieve, but his workers did. Not because they built larger, because they built honestly, because they wrote a name in a space no one was ever supposed to read, because they said, I was here in the dark, because they cared about the fact of their presence more than the official version of what the presence was supposed to look like. The friends of Khufu. I'm not sure I can explain why that detail holds me the way it does. I've tried a few times, and the explanation always comes out wrong. Too neat, too summarized. Something about it resists the summary. I'll try anyway, and you can tell me where I lose it. The scale in Egypt is honest. The feather is light. The question is, what have you written in the hidden chamber? What is the thing you did when no one was watching? Not because you were hiding, but because the work itself was in a space that would never be opened, in a place where verification was structurally impossible. What is the care you brought to a thing that would never be recorded? What is your gang name, the collective name, the name of all the particular impulses and memories and capacities that constitute your participation in the short, specific, unrepeatable work that this life is asking of you? What is the version of your life that, placed on the scale, is lighter than the world wants it to be? Lighter in the good direction, lighter than the casing stones and the ceremonial weight and the official story of what you are supposed to be. What is the honest version? The version you could write in red ochre, in the dark, when no one is coming. The silence after each of those questions is the point. The whisper carries that. The space after the sentence expands the way the desert expands at night, not empty, but full of everything that isn't being said, which is most of it, which is where the weight lives. There is a detail about the Nile that most accounts of the pyramids leave out because it doesn't fit the architecture story neatly, even though it is the foundation beneath the foundation, the reason any of it was possible at all. The Nile floods because of rain, not local rain. The desert receives almost none. It floods because of rain falling in Ethiopia, thousands of kilometers south, in the highlands around Lake Tana, where the Blue Nile begins, where the summer monsoon drops enormous quantities of water onto the mountains, water that collects into rivers, rivers that pour into the Blue Nile running north through Sudan, meeting the White Nile at Khartoum, arriving in Egypt changed. The ancient Egyptians did not know this. They knew the flood came. They knew Sirius would rise first and the water would follow. They had built an entire cosmology around the mechanism, but the mechanism was invisible, operating in a geography they had no access to, produced by a weather system entirely beyond their observation. So the flood arrived as a gift, as Ma'at expressing itself through water, as annual confirmation that the ceremonies had been accepted, that the pharaoh's ritual performance of the previous year had been sufficient, that the order would continue. And for 3,000 years, it did. The Nile flooded reliably. For 3,000 years. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. Not because I'm going to extract a lesson from it. I'm not. But because it resists being held, and I think that resistance is the point. The entire history of Western civilization from Greece to now is roughly 2,500 years. Egypt lasted longer. And in that span, the pyramids, built in the first few centuries of it, were already ancient by the time of the New Kingdom, were already objects of reverence and mystery, were visited by Egyptians who came the way modern tourists come, who left graffiti on the casing stones in the cursive hieratic script of the later period, who wrote their names and the dates of their visits, their names and the dates of their visits on the stones of a building that was already old when their civilization was still running. The distance between then and now. I'm going to try to say this without making it more elegant than it is. The distance collapses, that's all. You can feel, not as a metaphor, but as a physical sensation, the thread that runs through every person who has stood at the base of the Great Pyramid and looked up and felt the weight of time arrive somewhere below the sternum. Every person who went home afterward and found they couldn't quite explain it. Not the scale exactly, not the age exactly, but something about having stood there, something that left them feeling not diminished, the way you might expect, not reminded of their smallness in a depressing way, but strangely authorized, confirmed, permitted to be exactly as temporary and as solid as they actually are. I don't fully understand why the experience produces that. I've thought about it a long time, and I'm still not entirely sure. I'm keeping the thread anyway. Anyway, the stars are moving, not perceptibly within a human life, but measurably if you have 4,500 years to measure. The precession of the equinoxes, a wobble in the Earth's axis, like a top losing just a little of its spin, tilting in a slow cycle that takes roughly 26,000 years to complete. Because of that wobble, the stars have shifted relative to the cardinal directions since the pyramid was built. The star the Great Pyramid was aligned to, probably Alpha Draconis, the pole star of that era, now nowhere near the pole, has moved. The current 3/60th of a degree deviation from true north is not a construction error. It is the accumulated drift of 4,500 years of precession. And if you reverse the calculation, if you take the pyramid exactly as it stands and ask, what was this aligned to at the moment the last stone was placed? The answer points to the center of the ancient sky, the still point, the place where the stars appeared not to move, where the whole visible universe seemed to rotate around a fixed axis. The pyramid was aligned to the thing that doesn't change. Whether that is the most sophisticated act of architectural humility in human history, or the most sophisticated act of architectural arrogance, depends on how you read it, and I think it depends entirely on the day you're having when you try to read it. Humility. The building acknowledges that the sky is the reference, that the human structure defers to the cosmic structure, that correctness is defined by alignment with what was here before you and will be hereafter. Arrogance. The building claims that alignment, says I am oriented to the still point, therefore I am the still point. I am the unchanging center. I am the measure against which other things are measured. Both are true. The pyramid holds both without resolving them, like a hand that closes around a contradiction and refuses to drop either side. This is, and I realize I'm going to sound like I'm making a large claim here, but I think it's accurate. The most Egyptian thing about the structure. Ma'at is not a choice between humility and arrogance. Ma'at is the alignment of the two. The recognition that you are exactly as large as you actually are, no more and not less, exactly as important and exactly as temporary as the specific life you have, and the heart and the feather are balanced because neither is pretending to be what it is not. Let me collect the thread for a moment. There are several of them running at once, and I want to make sure I haven't dropped the one that matters most. The flood comes from Ethiopia. The star that the pyramid faces is no longer where it was. A foreman whose name is not recorded wrote his gang's name in red ochre in a sealed chamber above the king's chamber. The pyramid was built to make one man permanent. The man is gone. The pyramid remains. And in the pyramid, the thing that survives most completely, the thing with the most presence, is the name that was written in the dark. These are the facts. I could arrange them into an argument, but I think the argument is already there, already visible, and making it explicit would be the wrong move. Like over-explaining a joke or filling in the silence after a question that was better left hanging. The Nile flooding, the procession, the red ochre name, the weighing of the heart against a feather, all of it pointing in the same direction, and the direction it points is not toward the pharaoh. The pharaoh is gone. The direction it points is toward, and here I want to be careful because I've written this sentence several times and it keeps coming out either too big or too small. And maybe that's the right condition for it. Maybe it should arrive slightly wrong, like a key that fits but requires a little force. The direction it points is toward the honest version, the version without the casing stones, the version in the dark where no one is coming. The scale is honest, the feather is light. The 3/60th of a degree error is so small it took modern instruments to detect, and so human you can feel it in the throat. This is what remains, the trying. Let us go inside one more time. The descending passage enters from the north face at roughly 26 degrees, angled down, cutting into the body of the thing, heading toward a subterranean chamber that is dug into the bedrock and then abandoned, left unfinished. Nobody knows why. That's the first mystery, and it's the one most people walk past because it's underground and inconvenient to reach. and there's nothing dramatic to photograph. The abandoned chamber sits there in the dark beneath the pyramid, and it does not explain itself, and I find I can't explain it either, so I'll leave it the way the builders left it, incomplete, present, below everything else. The ascending passage branches off from the descending one at a junction that was sealed with granite. The robbers of antiquity. And I use that phrase with something like admiration, honestly, because the logistics of robbing a sealed pyramid in the dark with copper tools are not trivial. Those robbers didn't remove the granite. They went around it. They tunneled through the softer limestone on the side, which took longer but was possible. And I think about that decision sometimes, the pragmatism of it, the someone in the dark figuring out that the hard path wasn't the right path. Anyway, the ascending passage leads to the Grand Gallery. The Grand Gallery leads upward into the antechamber, and then the King's Chamber. But there is also a horizontal passage at the base of the Grand Gallery, branching sideways, leading to a smaller room. The Queen's Chamber, named wrong, named by later explorers who assumed function from form and got the function wrong, which is a habit of later people looking at earlier things. A habit I'd criticize more forcefully, except I catch myself doing it constantly. The Queen's Chamber has two passages, called air shafts, though what they actually are is still debated. That angle upward through the pyramid's body. The southern one points toward Orion's belt. The northern one points toward the celestial pole. Neither of them reaches the outer surface. They stop. They are sealed. They are aimed at something they never touch, built with extraordinary precision, pointing with astronomical accuracy at specific stars, and they don't arrive. I'm not sure I have a satisfying way to describe this. It feels like something said very carefully that ends before the last word. Small robots were sent up the shafts. This is the part of the story where I always pause, not because it's complicated, but because it's so strange. The oldest large stone structure on the planet, and at some point in the early 21st century, a small wheeled machine with a camera crept up a shaft no human could fit inside, heading towards something sealed for 45 centuries. The robot found a door, 8 centimeters thick, stone, with copper handles, a door in a sealed shaft, in a sealed room, in a sealed pyramid. The handles are... I kept coming back to the handles when I was reading about this. Handles on a door that was never meant to be opened from the inside. Behind the door, the robot showed there is a small space, and in that space, there may be something. The investigation was stopped. Preservation concerns, political complications, the usual tangle of jurisdiction and access and funding and time. The door has not been opened. Let me collect the thread here, because I realize I'm moving quickly through something that deserves to be slowed down. The pyramid was built, and this is the part I want to be precise about, because I have fumbled it in earlier drafts of this. The pyramid was built by people who thought with extraordinary care about what happens after a body stops working. The whole structure is a machine for that thought. The passages, the alignment, the chambers, the granite plugs, the air shafts pointing at specific stars, the weighing of the heart against a feather, all of it is the same argument made in different materials. And the argument is not about death, The argument is about what the Egyptians called the second death. The first death is the body. The second death is forgetting. The pyramid was the world's loudest and heaviest attempt to prevent a second death. Khufu is forgotten. I mean, we know his name. We know some of what he built. We know almost nothing else. The specific texture of his experience, the particular quality of his fear at 3 a.m, what he loved, what he regretted, what it felt like to be him on any specific afternoon. Gone. The soul that the pyramid was built to protect has not survived in any form that is recognizable as a soul. The gold is gone. The mummy is gone. The canopic jars, the offerings, the carefully prepared body meant to house the returning consciousness, all of it, stripped, scattered, lost. What survived is the foreman's handwriting, red ochre, in a hidden chamber above the king's chamber, in a space that was not meant to be entered. Construction supervisor's marks, the kind written for the workers who came next, not for posterity, not for archaeologists, not for anyone. The gang name, Friends of Khufu, written in the dark by someone whose own name was not recorded, who was not the pharaoh, who was not building anything for himself, who was just doing his job and labeling his work the way a worker labels his work, because there's another gang coming after and they need to know what's been done. He wrote it and sealed it into the structure, and it survived everything. This is... I'm not sure I can say what this is exactly. I've tried several formulations, and they all feel either too neat or too sentimental. Maybe it doesn't need a formulation. Maybe the fact is enough. The name of the king's gang, written by a man whose own name we don't have, has lasted 4,500 years in a sealed room and is still there. The star the pyramid was aligned to is not in the same position it was. The precession of the equinoxes has moved it. The alignment was perfect for a specific moment, in a specific century, and then time continued and the stars continued, and now the alignment is historical rather than current. The pyramid still points. The thing it points to has moved on. So there, the Queen's Chamber passages. I want to go back to them because I don't think I gave them enough. The King's Chamber passages open to the exterior. You can, in principle, look up one of them and see daylight, see the outside, see where the passage emerges in the pyramid's face. The Queen's Chamber passages don't. They stop inside. They are pointing at stars that they are not reaching, aimed with precision at destinations they don't connect to. And at the end of the southern shaft, there is a stone door with copper handles that has not been touched in 45 centuries. I keep wanting to say what this is like, to reach for a comparison, and the best I can manage is that it's like an address written on a letter that was never sent. Precise, intentional, complete in every respect except arrival. I know that's not quite right. I'll leave it. The investigation was halted. The door has not been opened. We have cosmic ray muon tomography now. We can pass particles through the pyramid and detect anomalies in the stone, variations in density, hidden spaces, chambers the X-ray of the universe reveals, without our having to drill. And there are anomalies. There are spaces that have been suggested and not yet confirmed, corridors that might exist, rooms that the muons hint at, and the drill has not reached. The pyramid is still giving up its plan slowly, piece by piece, over centuries, letting each generation find one more thing. This is not an accident. I think, and this is the point where I'm aware I'm reaching, where I should probably hedge, but I find I don't want to. I think the secrecy is structural. I think the people who built this thing understood, at some level, that mystery is not what is left over after you run out of explanations. Mystery is a design element. The door with the copper handles at the end of the unreachable shaft is not a failure to communicate. It is a communication. It says, there is still something here. Come back. Keep coming back. The building is larger than your current understanding of it. Anyway, the argument the pyramid makes is still being made. 6 million tons of limestone, pointed 3/60ths of a degree off from true north. Close enough that it took modern instruments to detect the error. And the error is so small and the honesty of it so complete that it feels more precise than perfection would. A perfect thing has no texture. This thing has 3/60ths of a degree of texture, which is the texture of a human hand on an instrument. The texture of someone doing their absolute best on a scale so vast that their absolute best still comes out slightly wrong, honestly wrong, in the way that lets you feel the person behind the measurement. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber is empty. That is a bare fact, and I'll leave it bare. The granite box at the center of the largest stone structure ever built is empty. The king is not there. Whatever was there has been removed, or was never placed, or disintegrated across the centuries. Empty. The chamber is cold and silent and precisely dimensioned, and the box at its center contains nothing. The pyramid is not finished telling its story. After all of it, the moon tomography, the robots, the 4.5 millennia of robbers and priests and tourists and archaeologists and armies and colonial administrators and independence movements and UNESCO designations. After all of it, there is still a door at the end of a sealed shaft, inside a sealed room that has not been opened, still something behind it, still something we do not know. This is the gift. I want to be careful about calling it that, because gifts can sound too neat, too wrapped, and this is the opposite of wrapped. But I think the word is right. The mystery is not what the builders failed to explain. The mystery is what they built on purpose, what they sealed with care, what they aimed at specific stars and did not connect to, what they wrote in the dark with red ochre for nobody. The secret at the end of the passage is a gift from 45 centuries ago to anyone standing at the base of the thing tonight, looking up, feeling the weight of the time descend. The gift is, you have not seen everything. Keep looking. The building is not done with you. We are arriving at the edge now. The edge of the story, the edge of the night, the edge of where attention can hold. Let me try to say what the pyramids were for, because I've been circling it for a long time and I want to land on it, even imperfectly. Most people believe they were tombs, large stone boxes for dead kings. And that is not wrong exactly, but it's the container without the content. It's the shape of the argument without the argument itself. The pyramids were built to refuse something, to refuse in the loudest and most durable and most mathematically precise way available, to accept that a life ends when a body does. They were built to insist, to make the insistence permanent, to cut limestone with copper tools and float it on the Nile and haul it up a ramp and set it with a 58mm tolerance and align it to the still point of the sky, and to say with all of that at a volume that 45 centuries have not quieted. This mattered. The experience of being alive mattered. The consciousness and the memory and the fear in the dark before dawn and the weight of everything pressing down that mattered enough to argue for in stone. The argument failed in the narrow sense. Khufu did not achieve the immortality he intended. We cannot consult the scale of Anubis. The soul that the pyramid was built to house has not been found, but the argument is still here. The argument is 6 million tons of limestone, and the foreman's handwriting, and the copper-handled door, and the 3/60ths of a degree error, and the empty sarcophagus in the cold room, and the star that has moved on, and the passages pointing at where the star used to be. The argument is the structure, asking everyone who stands at its base and looks up, what is the thing you would insist on? What is the life you would argue for in stone and mathematics? What is worth the weight of that kind of attention? What is worth insisting on at this hour, in this dark, when the body is horizontal and the mind is almost quiet? Let the weight stay. Let the question stay. Not as something to answer tonight, not as a task, but as a companion. The way the desert is a companion to the pyramid. The way the scale is a companion to the feather. Present and patient, and not requiring resolution. Let the cold chamber be what it is. Empty, yes, but precisely empty, deliberately empty. Empty in the way a vessel is empty before it is filled, which is different from empty the way something is empty after it's been used up. Let the foreman's name stay in the hidden chamber. Friends of Khufu, in red ochre, in the handwriting of someone whose fear and love and full life we will never know, but whose name, written for the next gang and not for posterity, will outlast everything built since, in the dark for nobody, and yet, let the star complete its arc below the horizon. Let the flood come when the star returns. Let the alignment be 3/60ths of a degree off. Close enough, honest enough. Good in the way only honestly attempted things are good. True in the way the imperfect thing built with full attention is more true than the perfect thing that was never really tried. Let the copper-handled door stay closed one more night. The secret has been keeping for 4,500 years. It will keep until morning. And in the morning, not the sealed shaft, not that door, but the one in your own hidden architecture, the passage you built towards something you have been pointing at without reaching, the thing the corridor was built to approach. Let the desert be the desert, not empty, full of what has been worn away, returned to constituent elements, reclaimed by the indifference that preceded everything and will outlast everything, full of the red land's particular fullness, the land of absence, the land that is itself without argument, without the flood's gift, without the black soil, without the condition that makes cultivation possible, honest in its way, patient in its way. The pyramid argues against the desert. The desert is patient. The argument continues. Tonight, let it continue without you. Let the stone hold the argument. Let the mathematics maintain the alignment. Let the sarcophagus be empty in the cold room, and let that emptiness be what it is. Let the worker's name stay in the dark. If this carried you somewhere near the base of the thing you're building, near the question it was built to ask, near the hidden chamber and the red ochre name and the scale that tells the truth. Then the next story goes further, past the edge of the Black Land, across the Red Land, toward the civilizations that came before Egypt and made their own arguments in their own stone and their own mathematics and their own alignment with what doesn't move. You only have to come back. One sentence. The pyramid stands in the desert, and the desert is patient, and the night between them is the same night it has always been. Good night.